The sun occasionally shines on the United Kingdom, on England. Indeed, I sat recently with my next-door neighbour and his 19-year-old son, and we sat in the sun and we talked about the world in general, and the conversation got round to the EU referendum. And I have to say, I was amazed. My neighbour said that what we really needed were facts, and his son said he didn't vote anyway because he'd got as much faith in, or he wouldn't vote anyway, because he'd got as much faith in the nameless faces, as it were, in Brussels as he had in our so-called representatives at Westminster. And I got to thinking, and I realised that I too have no faith whatsoever in our so-called political representatives. And then I got to thinking about the referendum and the so-called facts. There are very few facts available, and all these are, of course, in favour of leaving. But let's first look at the awful question of not being able to trust our MPs. Now, some people might think this is a somewhat jaundiced view, and it's a generalisation that doesn't hold good, and that's probably true. But the fact still remains that the most significant problem we have in the UK is, in fact, our political representatives and the party political system. I've said this for years. My novel, Wilder's Women, in fact, deals with the very subject. But it occurred to me that the facts, or the debate, or call it what you will, about the referendum are being presented to us on both sides of the so-called argument, are being presented to us by these very people. The people I've previously said, as far as I'm concerned, are our biggest problem. This means, of course, that individuals in whom the population in general have very little faith are putting the case for and against membership of the EU to the population at large. Now, this can't be a very satisfactory situation, given that they will follow the standard party political regimes. In other words, as I know I've said many times before, you either try to ridicule your opposition, or you present statistics that have no meaning. For example, David Cameron, for example, always talks about we ought to remain members of a reformed, and Osborne uses the same phrase, the reformed European Union. Well, if we had a reformed European Union, I don't think anybody would be opposed to it. And we all believed in, well, at least people of my age believed in the common market, as it was called, and we voted for it or to stay in it in 1975. I, for one, wouldn't be opposed to the coming together of all the nations of Europe, if it were in a how can I put it? If it were in a union of sovereign states. I've got no opposition to close collaboration and a free trade area. I don't think anybody has. But this is not what we're faced with. But we're still being asked, or the presentation of the so-called facts on either side of the so-called argument. You'll notice I keep saying so-called because I don't believe any of it, to be honest. There is no argument. But anyway, the two cases are being put to us by politicians. And if we don't trust those politicians, We're never going to trust anything they tell us. But so what are the facts? I mean, this is the question. What are the facts of our situation? Well, we have to, it's very simple really, we have to ask ourselves, do we want to control our own destiny, or do we want to leave that to non-British third parties who, in general terms, haven't been elected? Now, if the answer to that is no, we don't want to leave it to them, then we have to leave. If we're quite happy to do so, I don't understand where we've, as a nation, have disappeared to. I mean, are we not in favour of voting in favour of a government that we choose, or are we just going to let anybody? I mean, I'll go down the street tomorrow and decide what our next 10 years are going to be all about. It's you wouldn't accept that, but I think I'm equally capable of deciding what's good for the UK as our so-called representatives. So there you have it. I mean, this is the basic fact. We either vote to govern ourselves, or we give that right away. We either allow people in and out of the country as they see fit. Vast numbers of people have access, which will mean that the very nature, the personality, the culture of the United Kingdom will simply disappear. I mean, it won't do it tomorrow, but it will do it over the next or the next generation. And everybody keeps trotting out these sort of statistics, but I heard it said that we, as it were, have a birth rate, or we produce on average 1.5 children, I think it is, per family. Whereas the Muslims, for example, who are coming into the country, have birth rates of 3.5, 3.6 children. Well, it doesn't take very long. The mathematics are fairly obvious. Give people unfettered right to come into the country. And that includes, of course, people being placed here by people who wish us ill, with an instruction to breed at the fastest possible rate they can. We will become a Muslim country, or, put it another way, we'll become a country that's unrecognisable as the United Kingdom in a very short period of time. Now, do we want that? We don't need to go into all the nuts and bolts of whether we'll be better off in terms of earnings and sales and business and all the rest of it. I mean, somebody like me, I can remember very well when milk was delivered to the door by a man with a churn and a scoop, and it was the local farmer, and the local farmer supplied sold all his goods, as it were, meat, cheese, etc., all within a 50-mile radius of the farm. I mean, why can't we do that? I mean, why is everybody continuously talking about multinational trade as if it's the only thing that a nation can sustain itself with? It seems that the average dairy farmer can't make a living out of selling his milk. Is this one of the benefits of the EU? We can grow all the fruit and vegetables we need. We used to have endless numbers of different manufacturers of motorbikes, cars, etc. We provided our own steel. We made our own railway engines, etc., etc. Why do we need to lose our steel industry, etc., etc., when we're huge consumers of steel? So the facts of the matter are, do we wish to govern ourselves, reform our own political system, because that's absolutely essential? The third-rate politicians that the current system has spawned are an indicator of the problems throughout the world, never mind within the UK. So I submit that those are the facts. We have to get off our backsides and start providing for ourselves. We can do it. There's no reason we shouldn't. And above all, we wish to control our own borders. We have to. It's a small island. We can't go on accepting people ad lib based upon this spurious argument that we've always allowed people to come into the country from the Commonwealth, etc., etc., and this is why our trains, buses and health service run at all. Well, sure, that's true, but this was a limited number of people coming into the country every year, not an open border. And it's well, even if the border was open, the demand or the influx of people was manageable. It's going to be unmanageable in the future. And it's being suggested that we should accept that, and in some way, shape or form that we're racist or anti-immigrants because we think that way. So, I rest my case. If we want to govern ourselves, to reform our own system, never mind about Europe, reform our own system, start to make our politicians answerable to us, and the required quality of people are here in this country. They don't subscribe to the party political system, I agree, and nor should they. But they're here. Given the opportunity, they'll rise to the occasion, and we can suddenly be reborn. Indeed, I'll go so far as to say that the whole reason for the apathy, the distrust, etc., etc., that seems to permeate the whole of our society is born of our membership of the European Union. Not our geographical location in Europe. That's a different thing altogether. And there's no good reason at all why we cannot cooperate with the nations of Europe and then any nation on the face of the globe. So you must make up your mind. But the argument that the in campaign or in favour of this, the out campaign, there's no in and out debate. There's no sense in any of the debate. None of us know what's going to happen in the future, other than we will have no rights over our own government, no control over our borders, no currency other than the euro or whatever ends up in its place, and we shall simply be a district of Europe. With our votes would be worth nothing. We shan't want any MPs. What do we want MPs for? They're not doing anything. They're just rubber stamping whatever comes to them from Brussels. Do we want that? They'll be sitting down next and asking for more money in order to sit there and do 50% less. The whole thing's ridiculous. So, think about it. We want independence. So, therefore, we leave.